The courthouse breathed like a tired ship. Harborview Hall's oak ribs creaked. Its stained glass shook whenever a truck groused past on Wharf Avenue, and the river's brine threaded the air. When the double doors swung open, a girl entered barefoot, her braids salt-tangled, her eyes steady as tide. She crossed the aisle without hurry and looked up at the biggest man in the room, the one in the robe whose name hung on every headline like a pennant. "I can read your mind," she said. The gallery tittered, ready to be entertained. Then she added, almost kindly, "You still wake to the sound of the river when it turns." Silence landed like a gull. The room knew how to laugh at small people. It was the nature of rooms like this, wood-paneled, portrait-lined, made to amplify authority. Justice Malcolm Voss presided from the bench like a lighthouse cut from basalt, tall, silver at the temples, smile designed by committees. He let the laughter swell and crest. He had tamed juries, aldermen, and drunk sailors. He could tame a barefoot child who walked on his carpet. "Bailiff," he said mildly, "we appear to have an unexpected guest." Jonah Pike, square-shouldered and tire-worn, stood from his post. His jaw worked like he was grinding coffee beans with his teeth. "Miss, you can't—" "I can read your mind," the girl repeated, but it wasn't really repetition. It was a confirmation. She had the calm of someone who had already heard the answer. She tilted her head as if listening for a distant bell. "And yours is loud when you worry, Mr. Pike." A hinge squeak, like a boat locker that never latches. The laughter thinned. Some phones went up, others lowered. In the second row, a young man with a thick black jacket and a hat, clutched in both hands, stared like he'd forgotten how to blink. In the back, a reporter with a ribbon of auburn hair, Kira Lane, by her press pass, angled herself for the best shot and typed without looking. Voss rapped the gavel once, more for the stagecraft than the sound. "We maintain decorum even during auditions. Bailiff, escort the child." "You still wake to the sound of the river when it turns," the girl said to him, and the gavel's wood suddenly felt cheap in Voss's hand. "It wakes you when it runs out, and again when it runs in." He held her look. 1, 2, 3 beats. He was a judge. All of Port Meridian knew his count. "What is your name, child?" "Nia," she said. "Nia Okoye." She was 9, if you had to pin her to a number, but she wore her age like a raincoat, something she could shrug off if it hindered her movement. "What brings you into Superior Court, Miss Okoye?" Her eyes flicked to the ceiling, to the stained glass mariner holding a lantern high. "The tide." A merciful chuckle returned to the room. Voss let it linger. "Your parents? Your guardian?" Nia's nostrils flared at the chemical lemon of the polished banisters. Somewhere outside, a tugboat's horn flatted against the windows. She heard the inside of mines, the way she heard tide, pressure and pull, sound and warmth, texture and tempo. The judge's mind was deep water with a secret current. Most minds were easy, little ripples with silt and bottle caps and minnows. His was a river mouth. "I came to tell the truth," she said simply. "About me?" He answered with a smile shaped like goodwill. "About what you left in the mud where the marsh spits into the river," she said. "About the part you keep beneath your house. Cedar smell, carpet tacks in your palm. About the ring of a lark." Phones rose like a school of fish, mirror flash scales. The room quieted to a hush with texture, like the hush of surf under fog. Voss's expression did not change. This was his trick, the face that did not move. But his hand shifted under the bench. Jonah Pike saw it, because Pike had seen Voss's hands in every weather. Steady on a warrant, decisive on a verdict, slow on the lid of a cookie tin the day the Chief Justice retired. Pike also saw Clerk Mateo Rojas, thin as a reed, reach to ensure the red light on the recorder glowed a steady eye. "Ms. Okoye," Voss said, "the court is not a circus. Bailiff, if you please." Nia's bare feet pressed the runner carpet and found the hard slats beneath. They hummed, a hollow sailor's song, the old courthouse shipwood telling her where it had sailed. Harborview Hall had been a warehouse once. Its beams still remembered capstans and whales. "You came here because you thought your robe is a seawall," Nia said, not with triumph, but with a sadness so light you could miss it. "But the river keeps finding the low places." The second row's young man jerked like he'd been slapped. His lips formed a name, Elena. In the benches behind him, The auburn-haired reporter bit her pen cap and glanced at him sidelong. Kira Lane knew the look of a spark in dry grass. Voss let his smile sharpen by a degree. Steel in velvet. "Bailiff," he said. Pike approached the girl slowly, palms visible. His knees bending were noisy in his head, like a rope halyard clacking against a mast. He felt the eyes of the room crawl on his back, and hated that his skin could feel like a billboard. "Nia, is it?" he said, lowering himself to her level. "Let's take a walk, yeah?" She turned to him, and the murmurs of the gallery seemed to fold behind them like a curtain falling. Up close, the child had the tidal smell of the salt marsh and a scab across one ankle where cordgrass had kissed her too hard. "Your mother keeps her pills in the flour tin," she murmured to him, not as a weapon, but as an apology. "You don't like the rattling sound when you bake." Pike's breath shortened, then steadied. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. Bring her to my chambers," Voss said. "We will arrange for social services. We will sort this without wasting the court's time." The room took a step toward movement, that collective shift of bodies on bleachers. And then Nia looked at the bench. She looked at the man with the robe and the portrait of the first harbor magistrate, watching like a scolded father behind him. She did not soften. She did not harden either. She simply waited until even he felt the waiting. "Do you want me to say it now?" she asked. And if there had been seagulls wedged above the moldings, you could have heard their claws scrape. "The bridge's name? The song she sings when she's afraid?" Voss's jaw clicked. He had not meant it to. In the back row, the auburn-haired reporter stopped typing and instead placed her phone flat on her knee, as if she were about to pray. Nia took a breath, the tide turning somewhere inside her chest. "2 days ago," she said, as if narrating for someone who had to be led from one room to the next, "I was on Dock Street watching the boats cut the river like they remembered the same routes forever." The courthouse dimmed in her voice, like a scene wipe. A foghorn groaned. Outside, across the tidal flats, the saltgrass bowed all one way, then another, and the city's clock, the one above the cannery that had gone to seed, tick, tick, ticked like a stuck metronome. 2 days earlier, she thought, and the story carried her out the doors and down Wharf Avenue into the mist where she had begun. Dock Street was all kinds of wet, even when it didn't rain. The air sweated, the boards cried old brine, the gulls were wet sounds in a gray sky. People leaked too, their fears, their little lies, their wanting. Nia stood at the edge of the fish market where the buckets of crushed ice steamed like breath. She listened. People's minds were not words to her. They were an orchestra of intimacy that no one else heard. The shopkeeper's worry was a quick violin playing a stolen motif. The missing cash envelope from the weekend's till slipped into the freezer behind chowder bags. A broker in too blue suit passed fast, his head filled with a tiny radio that jabbered the same phrase, "Not tonight, not tonight," and a drift of perfume that wasn't his wife's. A dock worker with a wharf rat tattoo thought in slow drums about getting on the southbound bus and leaving his debt to mold in the tide line. "Don't," she said, and the dock worker turned. He had shoulders like a fridge and eyes like a dog that had learned to be careful around boots. "The bus's brake line is bad." He swallowed. "How would you—" "You hear it?" she said, and he did, because the city was full of mechanical truths. He nodded once, as if to the river, and sat back on his crate. The market rippled with glance and whisper. Port Meridian had its share of characters. The man who wore a sailor's cap even in bed, the woman who lectured the pigeons on maritime law. A barefoot child with sea in her hair was a small spectacle. People asked her to read them like palms. She laid no hands. She spoke 2 sentences to a woman gripping her tote too tight. "You didn't throw out that letter. You put it under the bread box." The woman went home to cry, for relief, for being known. A boy with a lip ring asked what his father thought of him. Nia said, "He keeps your baby pictures in his glove box, but pretends he doesn't." The boy laughed too loud and was grateful. A cop saw the little storm gather and called it in, because that was what he did when a storm gathered. Sergeant Priya Deshmukh arrived in a tan car that needed a wash. She moved like a woman who did not have time for nonsense and had trained herself to see what was nonsense and what was danger. The market parted around her uniform and the authority it borrowed from the city. "Who's the show?" she asked the fishmonger, a cousin of a cousin who'd gone to school with her brother. Kid over there, he said, says she reads minds. Folks get spooky when she talks. Deshmukh watched as the child listened to a man's mind and told him gently, "You don't have to pretend your hand doesn't hurt." The man flexed fingers he'd been hiding in his pocket, and shame crept, then settled like a gull. Deshmukh did not believe in mind reading. She believed in scam artists, in unwell children, in attention that could get a kid hurt. She also believed in odd details. The braid end, frayed like nylon twine, the cut on the ankle, the way the crowd leaned toward the girl without realizing they'd done it. She stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Hey there." The girl turned. Her gaze didn't sit on the badge, it sat on the person wearing it. "Hello," she said. "What's your name?" "Nia." "You with somebody, Nia?" "I will be," Nia said, and it was not a threat or promise, it was a weather report. Priya waved the crowd back with a palm and lowered herself to the child's level. The smell of mackerel stuck to her uniform. She tried to ignore it. "Do you know your parents' phone numbers?" Nia, who could hear the sergeant's mind like a rumble strip, practical, disciplined, running beneath everything, a thin flute of a tune about a mother far away, shook her head. "Do you have an adult you stay with? A neighbor? A teacher?" "I need Justice Voss," Nia said. The name spiked through the air like a thrown harpoon. A couple of heads turned, hungry for gossip by reflex. Priya's face didn't move. She had stood in enough living rooms with enough names to know how not to give away the feel of them. "That's big game," Priya said lightly. "Why do you need him?" "Because the river won't stop talking," Nia said, "and he's the one who hears it at night." "You know Justice Voss?" Priya asked, watching the child's pupils, her breath, the set of her shoulders. "I know his tide." "How do you know tides and judges go together?" Nia looked toward the bridge upriver, its east span a darker slash in fog. Something happened there. The mud held on. It's still holding. People think water takes everything, but it doesn't. It gives things back different. "Okay," Priya said. She could talk a jumper off the cannery roof. She could talk a child into a patrol car. "Let's go someplace warm and figure out who you are. You okay with that?" Nia nodded, as if the sergeant had just agreed to a law of nature. At the precinct, the air traded brine for burnt coffee and rules. Deshmukh settled Nia at a metal table with a blanket draped over the back of the chair. She peeled a hot chocolate lid slightly and pushed it across. Nia wrapped both hands around it and closed her eyes for a moment, not drinking. Sometimes warmth was a proof that you were contained. The squad room did its usual background hum, printers purring, radios tick-ticking, the coil of a detective's lie whistling barely. Someone muttered in the kitchen area. "Kid's delusional. Claims she can read minds." Nia's head tilted. She spoke toward the doorway without looking. "You kept her scarf in your glove box." Silence across desks. Chairs stilled. The detective in the doorway, a man with salt sweat crusted at his collar, froze like someone had pulled his plug. His mind yelped, a dog whose tail had been stepped on. Deshmukh's hand touched the table, palm flat. "Whose scarf?" The man laughed the wrong laugh. "I don't—" "What is this?" "The woman from the shelter," Nia said. "You drive her to meetings. You think the scarf smells like cedar. You kept it to—" She stopped because she could feel the room turn in on itself, ready to swallow the man and spit out a different kind of mourning. "It's not a crime," she added quickly. "It's just, you liked that somebody leaned on you. That's all." The detective stared and then, in a smaller voice, said, "Yeah, okay." Deshmukh watched the tide in the room reverse and come in curious. She did not like spectacle. She did not like when human weakness became crowd sport. But the girl had not skewered the man. She had placed him a handhold. "You asked for Justice Voss," Priya said, drawing the string back to where it had begun. "Why?" "He is the one the tide keeps waking," Nia said. "He wears a robe because he thinks it will stop the water." "Kid," a cop at the next desk called, "what am I thinking?" He grinned, but his mind was a pinball machine blinking prove it. "You practiced a speech in the mirror 3 times this morning," Nia said without moving. "You didn't give it." The grin frayed. The cop looked away. Deshmukh had to ride the horse she'd just realized she was on. She took out a notepad, not to trick the girl, but to ground herself. "Nia, where do you live?" Nia hesitated. She did not lie. She didn't know how. "Sometimes the shelter," she said. "Sometimes with Miss Et on Bay Street, when she needs help with her plants, sometimes at the pier in the daytime, nights at St. Jerome when the weather is bad. School? Sometimes. Miss Ete wants to keep my records clean. Okay. Priya weighed options. A welfare hearing, a social worker, a story the press would chew, and that name again, like a buoy bell. Why Justice Voss today? The river said 2 days, Nia answered. The storm will pull. It will show the mud. If you ask him now, you will find the cedar box before the storm takes it. She looked at her hot chocolate and finally took a sip. And she hums, she whispered, when she's afraid. She? Priya asked. Elena, Nia said, and the name landed with terrible softness. Across the room, a young clerk named Mateo Rojas, in to file a warrant packet, heard the name and didn't know why his stomach dropped. He would remember that moment later, watching the red recording light glow like a bloodshot eye. Deshmukh closed the notepad. She should call child services and have the kid evaluated. She should do the slow, careful thing, but her gut had kept her alive in rooms where most of her body didn't fit. The way the girl spoke was not peacock, it was ballast. We can't just march you into a judge's courtroom, Priya said. I know, Nia replied, and her voice was so certain that for a second, Priya saw something wider than a girl in front of her. She saw the river itself, wearing a human face, choosing a human throat. How do we begin? Priya asked, despite herself. Bring me to Harborview Hall for a welfare hearing, Nia said. You can. You're allowed. Deshmukh frowned at the inside of her own rules. It could be done. It would be hell politically if it went sideways. And yet. On the notice board, a storm chart showed a swelling system sliding up the coast, its bands foaming white. All right, she said finally. We'll do it by the book. We'll bring you to court. Nia exhaled like she'd been holding air since the tide turned. She gathered the blanket and her hot chocolate and looked smaller suddenly, the way children do after you tell them they will not have to sleep outside. On the way to the car, Dock Street's gulls hawed their derision. The sergeant's tan sedan coughed to life and rolled past the cannery. They took Wharf Avenue, where trucks shook the bones of Harborview Hall. The courthouse rose out of the fog, like a story parents used to tell children to scare them. Mind your manners, or the brown building will swallow you and make you ring like a bell. In the passenger seat, Nia rested her forehead on the cool window and watched the river. The tide was slack, the water a flat thought. Do you really hear us? Priya asked abruptly, and then added, when the question sounded too naked. Our thoughts, I mean. I hear the parts that leak, Nia said. Some people are quiet because they're full, some because they're empty. You're quiet because you stack your thoughts like crates, even and high. Priya huffed a laugh. That's generous. It's true, Nia said. You don't drop things. Deshmukh gripped the wheel like it might try to wriggle away. She had spent her career keeping her private life uninteresting to the river of rumor that flowed through any city. But there was a comfort in the idea of someone hearing without judgment, like the tide that did not care who stood in it. It would rise the same. They turned into the courthouse lot. Inside, the walls took the sound and made it official. Nia's feet felt the wood tell her where it had once been. She lifted her chin. The river in her chest tugged toward the bench, the man, the secret. They were nearly at the double doors when a truck roared down Wharf Avenue and the building trembled, old timbers shouting their freighted past. The doors swung inward on their own breath. The gallery lifted its eyes. Nia walked in, small and sure, as if she had been summoned by the tide bell they kept in an alcove for ceremonial days. She was there to read the kind of thing no one shelved in a law library. And the judge smiled like he was used to choosing where a day went. Back in the courtroom, the coats and whispers settled in layers. Priya Deshmukh stayed near the door, close enough to act, far enough not to smother the child with the fact of the state. Clerk Mateo Rojas checked the recorder once, twice, then repositioned it, close to the bench, angled toward both judge and gallery. Kira Lane flipped to a fresh page of her notebook, because ink sometimes told a truer story than a battery could. In the second row, the young man with the hat crushed in his grip stared at the girl, his lips bitten almost purple. Miforajao. Ms. Okoye, Justice Voss said, tone measured. Superior Court is not a forum for games. If you require assistance, this court will ensure you are seen by... I don't need to be seen, Nia said, and the words didn't sass. They just stood. She does. She. Elena, Nia said softly, and the young man in the second row flinched so hard his hat fell. The sound of it on wood, smack, stung the quiet. Order, Voss said, though no disorder had occurred that he hadn't willed into the room. Kira's pen scratched like a match striking. Elena. She had typed that name in a dozen anniversary stories. The missing woman after the charity gala, the case that slipped like an eel through fingers, the city's pet unresolved bruise. Your Honor, Priya said carefully, we are convened on an emergency welfare matter regarding a minor. The child requested to speak in open court. Voss weighed his options with the speed of a man who had learned to think faster than the people watching him. He could shut this down and look like a bully. He could entertain it and look magnanimous. He chose theater. Very well. The court will afford the minor a moment to express herself. He gestured with 2 fingers. Jonah Pike stepped forward, but stopped when Nia lifted a hand. I'll only say what I hear, she told the room, because promising anything else would have been a lie. She looked up at Voss. You call it the night of the bridge. You call it the accident. You tell yourself your hands are clean because the tide comes and goes and takes everything with it. But the tide doesn't take the sound. It keeps the sound. People leaned forward before they knew they had. Pike's eyes went to Voss's hands, one folded, one tense on the bench edge. Rojas eased the recorder closer, heart tapping in his throat. The red light stared back at him, implacable. Enough, Voss said. The word had power. He'd used it to stop men from hitting one another, to end a sobbing jag, to push back grief in a room full of wail. He shifted it now to cover the strange fatigue that had crept into his left forearm. Nia did not flinch. She watched the man like a captain watching a tide table. You still hear the splash, she said quietly. You hear her humming when she's afraid. The young man in the second row, Luis, made a noise that wasn't speech. Kira reached to touch his sleeve, a neighborly anchor. Voss made a decision that felt like grabbing a railing that might or might not hold. He put on his better smile. Bailiff Pike, if the minor approaches the bench again, stop her. This is a court of law, not a seance. To the girl, unless you have something substantive to offer the court, your performance is over. What counts as substantive? Nia asked. Evidence, Voss said. Things. Facts, not stories. She nodded. Then may I touch you? The request fell with a heavier weight than a child should be able to lift. Pike's hand rose instinctively. No, he said, half to her, half to the idea of this escalating. It's all right, bailiff, Voss said, because he felt the control in the room slipping like a wet rope through his hands, and his reflex was always to couch a hazard as a demonstration. He had crushed hostile witnesses by playing host. Let the child approach, and then let us put an end to this. Pike hesitated. There were rules about people near the bench. There were rules about everything in this room. That was the point. But Voss had given permission, and order here was a hierarchy you could feel. Pike stepped aside, jaw nodding. Nia moved slowly, a sailor crossing slick deck. Her bare feet made the woods sing in a pitch just below hearing. Voss watched her climb the small steps, his tongue finding a scar at his cheek, the one he never thought about until mirrors caught a certain shade of mourning. He did not move as she reached the bench's corner. Don't, Luis hissed into his knuckles, to no one who could obey. Nia looked up at the man whose name the city said like an answer. I only need a second, she whispered, not for him, but for the dead. Then she put her palm on his head, lightly, like a gull alighting on a piling. The room gasped. Her hand was small and warm, against hair that had been cut in a good barbershop on the south side, where the owner joked like a priest. Beneath her hand, his skull was a tide chart, its ink blurring where water had gotten in. Nia closed her eyes. She heard rope halyards clacking. She heard shoes slipping on algae-slick stone. She heard a woman's breath hitching, then a lullaby hummed into a fist, as if to keep the sound small enough not to disturb the dark. She spoke as if describing a painting. It wasn't meant to happen. You pushed her by the rail at Gull's Lantern Bridge. The drop looked shallow. The tide was running out. She could see the angle in his mind, the way the beam had slicked under his palm. You thought you'd scare her. You didn't see the algae. She pitched. You grabbed. She fell. Voss's smile fractured in the corners, barely perceptible but true. His shoulder tightened under her palm like a cable taking strain. Slander, he said. His voice reached for thunder but brought back only a hollow. Remove your hand, child, bailiff. Pike did not move. Rojas stared at the red light and thought absurdly of how, if the power flickered, the recorder would switch to battery without a hiccup. Kira's pen had gone still. For once, she filmed with her eyes. Nia kept her palm in place, not pressing, just present. Her name is Elena, she said, and the humming rose in Voss's mind like a tide under floorboards. She hums when she's afraid. Luis stood so fast his knees hit the bench in front of him with a crack. You, he started, but the word didn't know where to go. Order, Voss said again, but the word had lost some scaffolding. Nia's voice stayed soft. You kept something of hers. Enough, Voss said. The volume came back. The authority pooled to him like water to a low place. Bailiff. Just a second more, Nia murmured, and the strangest thing was how much calmer she sounded than anyone else. You kept a silver lark pendant. She could smell the cedar. It's in a cedar box beneath your study's floorboard, 2 boards left of the window radiator. Voss blanched. It was a betrayingly human color in a man built for cameras. The gallery froze to better listen. You have to be very still to hear your own heart. Priya took 1 step forward, and then another, as if moving toward a precipice you know is there, even when fog hides it. She felt the cogs of policy turn. She felt the line between spectacle and probable cause draw itself like a tightrope. If this is theater, it is precision theater, her mind said, and her training told her to check the stage for wires. Voss tried for contempt. You will be removed, and this will be sealed, and your guardians will be— No, Nia said simply, removing her hand at last. You can have me removed, but the tide is turning. Thunder cracked somewhere offshore and rolled through the ribs of Harborview Hall. The stained glass mariner's lantern brightened with a shift of cloud. Jonah Pike's jaw unclenched, as if a small muscle had finally fought free. He remembered a night a decade earlier when Voss arrived at the courthouse with sea spray on his coat and a cuff torn as if by rough wood, and the memory he had kept as a collection stone became an accusation in his pocket. Rojas looked at the clock and then at the recorder and imagined, perversely, the sound waves tracing themselves into plastic, into the world. Kira Lane looked at Voss's cheek and saw the faint white nick she had noticed in a profile shot years ago and not cataloged, because sometimes your job was to collect osseous truth, and sometimes it was to survive long enough to report another day. Bailiff, Voss said for the 3rd time, but in the way you say a word when you're trying to remember what it means. Pike's mouth opened and then shut. Your Honor, he said, and it felt like he was stepping into colder water than anyone else in the room. Maybe we should hear her out. The surprise of that sentence was the biggest sound yet, and it made no sound at all. Nia lowered her hand to her side. The air around the bench felt emptied, the way the marsh feels when a bird has just lifted off, a sense of where weight had been and where it had gone. She did not smile. She did not triumph. She looked tired. The song is louder when the storm comes, she said. You don't have to keep waking to it. Voss's fingers twitched on the bench. Outside, the first drops of rain hit the courthouse steps, the sound like 1,000 tiny verdicts. And inside, every face turned toward the space between a judge and a child, as if there were a window there. And if you squinted, you could see the river at night, slipping out, slipping in, refusing to carry away what a man asked it to carry. The gallery inhaled for 100 different reasons. The room felt like a cliff just before a body goes over, inevitable and still, and full of choices already made. And in that inhaled quiet, with the storm beginning to drum and the recorder's eye watching, the story leaned forward into its own throat. The rain arrived with a cigarette hiss on the stone steps. Inside, the room's hush tightened, as if everyone had become the string of an instrument. You will stop this, Justice Voss said, and it should have landed like an order, but it sounded like a man telling the ocean to wait 5 minutes. Nia didn't move. It wasn't meant to happen, she said, the words careful as stepping stones. You pushed her by the rail at Gull's Lantern Bridge. The drop looked shallow. The tide was running out. A juror's cough died unborn. Someone's chair squeaked and then apologized by not squeaking again. Kira Lane's fingers hovered above her phone, then went for the notebook instead, pencil racing. Gull's Lantern Bridge. Outgoing tide. Bailiff, Voss said, a notch louder. Jonah Pike didn't reach for the girl. He was standing in 2 times at once, the now, and a night 10 years gone when the judge came in late through the staff door with his collar damp, a cuff torn by something that had teeth like wood, and never explained why he was holding his breath between words. Pike's own hands had trembled then, as if a thin wire had been strung between him and a future moment when he would have to decide which side of a man he served. "You think I'm a fool?" Voss asked, and there was the smile again, restored and polished. "You think I'm going to dignify—" "I hear rope halyards clacking," Naya said, quiet as the inside of a shell, shoes slipping on algae, a woman's breath hitching. "You smell the tar on the pilings and think of your father's hands." The bench might have been stone, but the man in it was not. The corners of Voss's mouth twitched retreat without moving. "Her name is Elena," Nia went on, and the name's syllables were the softest waves, the kind that do more by being constant than by being loud. "She hums when she's afraid." In the second row, the young man stood and then sat in the same movement, as if his knees had buckled with too much blood. Luis Marin didn't realize he'd said no until Kira touched his sleeve and said, "Hey, hey," the kind of voice you use on a ledge or a hospital bench. "Order," Voss repeated. It was habit, like a sailor tying the same knot no matter which rope. "Ms. Okoye, you will retract that. This is slander. This is contempt. This is—" "Recorded," Clerk Mateo Rojas said before he could stop himself, and if self-preservation were a sound, it would be exactly the dry swallow he made afterward. The little red light looked almost smug. Voss turned his gaze on Rojas, the way a searchlight turns on an unexpected boat. "Mr. Rojas," he said, smooth as ice, "you will erase this. With respect, Your Honor, that's not how it works." Rojas managed, the law's training doing his breathing for him. Sergeant Priya Deshmukh took a half-step forward. "Judge, we can de-escalate," she said. "The child is a minor. Let's bring this into chambers and—" Nia didn't wait for permission any more than a river waits for a schedule. "You called it an accident," she said to Voss, and the look on her face made the word itself new. Accident, a thing that breaks where you least expect. "You told yourself you could live with it. You have, but she hasn't. She keeps humming at you at night." "Bailiff." Voss didn't raise his voice, but something in it suggested he wished it were a tool he could swing. Pike took another step and stopped. He looked like he was choosing a door in a hallway, where every door led to a different version of his life. There was a muscle jumping in his jaw, like it was trying to chew its way out. "Please," Luis said, louder now, voice cracking. "Say her name again." "Elena Marin," Nia said. The syllables settled on the wood like salt. Kira Lane pressed her lips together so hard they went white. She had covered the missing woman anniversaries with due diligence and a cut-out-nothing approach. She remembered the photo that ran every year, Elena on the pier railing, eyes squint-smiling in morning sun, hair shoved in a careless bun, that lark pendant catching light. She had stood at this very back wall on a motions calendar day when Voss had bantered with defense and prosecution alike and had thought, polished, untouchable. She wrote now in a shorthand she hadn't used since journalism school because the old skills were good when your hands shook. Voss set his gavel down very carefully like it might explode. "You cannot enter my courtroom and spin stories," he said. "You cannot make a spectacle of my court to—" "What? Go viral? Sergeant, remove her." Priya didn't move. She had redirected fistfights and diffused domestic disputes by refusing to mirror the temperature in the room. She was not going to haul a 9-year-old out by the arm while a city watched with their phones. "If there's a claim of a crime," she said evenly, "we need to hear enough to decide whether to investigate. That's all anyone's committing to. Words, Your Honor." "Words?" Voss said. "She has accused me of murder." "No," Nia answered. "You did, every night." The rain ceased being a suggestion and began insisting. It thudded in thick drops against glass, and the courthouse sighed like an animal trying to get comfortable. The girl's voice pulled the room along. "It was the charity gala," she said. "Elena left early because the room was too loud and the wine was too sweet, and the men's laughter sounded like the clink of bottles in a crate. You followed because you thought she would ruin you if she talked. You didn't mean to hurt her. You wanted to frighten her. You said, 'Stop it, just stop it, you don't know what you're saying.' And your hand touched her elbow and then—" The sound that came out of Nia's throat wasn't a word. It was a skin-on-wet-wood slip. Luis made the same non-word, and it turned into, she never came home. Phones became statues. Even breath became something people negotiated. You will be silent, Voss said. It was a plea wearing the coat of a command. You were, Nia said, for 10 years. The word 10 hung heavier than the others. People could forgive a lot when time wrapped it, but 10 years was a number you could hold in your palm and feel its weight. Voss reached under the bench and closed his hand around nothing. He had kept a stress ball there once, during a public corruption trial that had reeked of industrial cleanser and shame. He'd thrown it away. His hand did not know the habit was gone. Kira scribbled, "He reaches, finds nothing." She underlined nothing until the paper tore. "Your Honor," Priya said quietly, "let her finish." Voss's eyes jerked toward her, a sliver of gratitude misplaced among all that rage. He almost said thank you because she'd offered him a path that didn't look like flight. He did not take it. He said, "Finish what? Her parlor trick? Herself?" "You kept something of hers," Nia said, and the room leaned forward like a field of grass in the same wind. "You kept it because you thought, you told yourself you were honoring her. That's what you made it mean so you could sleep. But really, it was a weight you liked. Something you could hold instead of the sound." "What?" Voss said, around the difficulty that had suddenly bloomed in his throat like a bruise. "Did I supposedly keep?" Nia lifted her eyes to the paneled ceiling, the way some people look up when they're trying to remember a lyric that lives in the rafters. "A silver lark pendant," she said. "You tore it from her neck when she grabbed your face. You didn't want it at first. You kept it because you needed to believe she had left you something gentle." The young man with the hat, Luis, made a sound like a line going taut. Kira's pen froze. The room was a held breath. Jonah Pike saw a tiny, terrible thing. Voss's fingers rising without permission to touch his cheek, just below the scar that was a crescent if you knew to look for it. Outside, the storm marched closer across the marsh. Inside, it had already arrived. "Enough," Voss said again, and if the word were wood, it would have been soaked through. He picked up the gavel and set it back down. He didn't swing it. For a man who had always loved the sound of knocking a day to order, this restraint should have been mercy. It looked like terror instead. The recorder's light burned. The tide clock on the wall, a gift from some maritime charity that believed in novelty, pointed its little boat icon toward ebb. Nia lowered her hand. "The river is running out," she said softly, "but it will turn." The gallery felt their own weight again, the strain of sitting this still, this long, in a world that might split any second. If someone had sneezed, if someone had coughed, the spell would have broken. No one did. The storm picked up the work of punctuation. Priya, who trusted procedure because it had saved her from worse things than embarrassment, drew in a breath that tasted like old varnish and wet wool. "We're going to talk about evidence," she said. "Now." And the room stirred because evidence meant the conversation was leaving myth for a map. "Evidence," Voss repeated, grasping the word the way a man on a heeled deck grabs a beam. "Yes, finally. Sergeant, you and I agree. This is a court, not a fortune-teller's tent." "Good," Priya said. "Then you won't mind if we list what can be checked." "This is outrageous," Voss answered without hearing her. He turned to the gallery, to the space beyond the bench, where reputation lived. "We are being held hostage by a child's fantasy and a hungry press. Bailiff, remove her to chambers. We will refer her to child services, and we will seal these proceedings to protect a minor from exploitation." Nia spoke over the plan, with a gentleness that made it worse. "It's in your house on Harbor Hill," she said, "in the study where the radiator ticks in winter because the air in the pipes is like trapped fish. In a cedar box beneath your floorboard. 2 boards left of the window radiator. The board has a shiny head nail you hammered back down and a jelly stain from when you spilled toast as a young father." The list of domestic errors reached under the robe and tugged at the man. Voss blinked. The room saw it. The kind of blink you do when your body betrays that it recognizes a hallway you didn't mean to walk down. Kira wrote, "Harbor Hill, cedar box, 2 boards left, jelly stain." She didn't look up when a court officer behind her leaned to his neighbor and whispered, "Those marsh flats under the bridge got exposed last week after the nor'easter. Public Works flagged it." The whisper traveled anyway, a new scent in the room, the possibility of a second map matching the first. "Bailiff," Voss said, trying to move the day with his voice again. "Now." Pike's boots didn't move. He looked at the girl like a man looks at a sunrise he doesn't want because he knows it will show him everything. The noise in his head, the hinge squeak the girl had named, quieted to the steadier complaint of something old bearing weight. "Your Honor," he said, hoarse. "With respect, the sergeant's right. Let's hear the child out. We can sort it." Voss registered the mutiny flicker and filed it where he filed everything, under handle later. "Fine," he snapped. "Miss Okoye, you have 1 minute." "1 minute's enough," Nia said. She didn't enjoy the winds. She didn't know how. "You thought the tide would take her, but the mud held her, under the east span of Gull's lantern, where the river rings out before it meets the marsh. You climbed down where the moss makes stairs. You told yourself no one would go there at that hour. You told yourself the storm would do the rest." She gasped once when the cold hit. "You told yourself it was the river speaking." Luis made a sound that was a ripped cloth. He stood, hat forgotten on the floor, and said, "You told us she ran away." It wasn't a question. It was a charge, at last properly named. "Order," Voss said, defaulting, because thinkers have ruts as surely as truck tires do. "Mr. Marine, you will be quiet, or you will be removed." Kira put a hand on Luis's arm. "You want him to hear you," she whispered. "Make him keep you in the room." Luis breathed through his nose like he was surfacing too fast and sat. His hands shook as if the cold had finally reached his bones 10 years late. Rojas slid the recorder another inch closer to the bench, as if proximity would make it remember more and forget less. He caught Priya's eye. They did not nod. Nodding would have been a conspiracy. But there was a recognition. Two people who understood that once a truth had voice, its shadow could be measured. Voss leaned forward, charm like a blade in his hand. "You are good, Miss Okoye," he said for the room's benefit. "I grant you that. You have an ear for gossip. You've been fed details. You think you can wound me with coincidence." Nia frowned, not because she took the bait, but because she was trying to translate what she heard into what would be believed. She didn't care whether people called it gossip or radio or water. She cared that a humming had to stop. "You see yourself wearing the robe, and you forgive the man inside it," she said patiently. "You tell yourself the law, and you are the same thing. But they're not." He smiled. "Is this civics class now?" "You wear the robe like a seawall," she said, "so you think the tide can't reach you." Pike exhaled like a tire that had been asked to hold too much. The metaphor wasn't a weapon to him. It was the same damn picture that had haunted his own sleep. Voss, granite in a robe, water licking his edges, and Pike, a low post that had to hold a rope tied to both. "Sergeant," Voss said, ignoring the child the way a man ignores a mosquito because admitting it bit is to admit he's not above blood. "This is over. Your welfare hearing is concluded. You will escort the minor to the appropriate agency, and I will issue a gag to protect her. The court will not entertain more slander." Priya cleared her throat, a single practiced sound that had once stopped a brawl in a bar when nothing else did. "Your Honor," she said, and she felt her badge like a stone you decide to keep in your pocket rather than throw. "What I'm hearing is enough to ask for a voluntary preservation of the scene and of any items in your home matching the description. I'd like to send units to the bridge now and request consent to search your study. Failing that, a warrant." She kept her voice neutral by force. "We can do this without spectacle. We can do it clean." "You will do nothing of the kind," Voss said, the heat blowing his careful voice apart to reveal the pipes underneath. "You will not harass a sitting judge in his home on the basis of a child's whisper and a reporter's hunger." Kira did not look up. She didn't break the rule that said, "Don't become the story." But she wrote reporter's hunger down because later she would want to hold the exact words and weigh them. "We can do it now," Priya said, "or we can do it with the Attorney General reading about why we didn't." She had learned early that if you speak in consequences, men forget you are a woman. They hear the boardroom instead of the living room. Voss stared. He knew how to scare people by reminding them of the room they were in. It was a skill that had made him. It flickered useless now. "The tide won't take it," Nia said softly, for him alone, though the room heard because the room had learned to hear her. "You told yourself it would, and the river said no. It gave it back to you every night. Luis pressed both hands against his eyes until stars went off behind his lids. He pictured his sister's neck. He pictured the chain she wore the way some people wear armor, not because it protected her, but because it reminded her she had been something before Port Meridian wanted more from her than she had to give. Jonah Pike chewed the inside of his cheek and tasted blood. He remembered a repair order for Voss's sedan a week after the gala. He had signed for the judge's keys, still flecked with sand. The invoice had read, front plate bent, impact at low speed. Voss had said, parking lot post. With a laugh, Pike had not believed then either. Where? Priya asked Nia evenly, returning the room to something she could measure with her hands. The site, specific as you can. Nia nodded, grateful to be asked for the thing she knew best. Under the east span where the marsh begins. She closed her eyes and tilted her head like a bird tasting the air. There's a ladder of old railroad ties, half buried in grass, 3 steps visible at low tide. The third one is loose and rocks when you put your weight on it. There's a sandbar that points like a finger toward the pilings. The tide line leaves a crust, like dried tears, on the lower beams. She opened her eyes. She's there. A court officer near the door whispered, Public Works reported debris out there after the nor'easter. Mud peeled back like... Voss slammed the gavel finally, once, twice. The sound too loud for the room. Enough, he said, and he had said it so many times it should have been a friend. It wasn't. Priya didn't flinch. I'm asking permission to step out and dispatch units, she said. I'm also asking you to recuse yourself from ruling on your own consent. We can go to a duty judge for the warrant. The word recuse hit Voss in the chest, like a shape he didn't recognize in a dark room. He opened his mouth to say no. He closed it on the taste of salt he could not explain. The tide clock's boat had nudged toward slack. The real river was turning in its bed. Clerk, Priya said without looking away from Voss. Note the request. Noted, Rojas said, steady as a metronome playing in a ship. He wrote the time in a hand that would have been more legible if he weren't trying to keep his pen from trembling. Voss waited for his instinct to tell him where to step. It told him nothing. He had always believed himself a man of action. Just now, he could not find a rule that didn't cut him open when he touched it. The rain struck harder, making the stained glass mariner quiver. And in the wood belly of the courthouse, the small saltwater animal that was the city's conscience wriggled into life under 1,000 eyes. Units, Priya said at last, not to the air, but to the radio at her shoulder. Stand by. And the room sagged on its ribs like a ship taking a wave and found it could bear it. Voss's left hand drifted to his cheek again, to the pale crescent, no makeup, ever fully erased. His barber had asked about it once, a lifetime ago. You shave in the dark, Your Honor? A joke. Voss had smiled and said, Don't we all? And they laughed like men who pretend that risk is just another word for appetite. Nia watched his fingers find the memory by themselves. She scratched you, she said. When you grabbed. She wanted to leave marks you couldn't wash. She did. He flinched and hated himself for it. I cut myself on a nail, he said. I was repairing a... You tell yourself that because if the story is a home repair, you can be the good man again, Nia answered. But in your sleep, you don't lie. You hear footsteps on wet planks. You hear her humming. And she hummed it then. A few notes shaped like a harbor lullaby, the one parents sang when boats came in late, and they wanted their kids to believe the world returned what it borrowed. Luis's knuckles went white. How? His voice failed again. How did you know that? Only 2 people had known Elena hummed when she was afraid, him and the woman herself. Not even their mother knew. Fear wasn't a thing you carried to the kitchen table. Kira's pencil paused in midair, the line she'd been drawing through hums when afraid going off into the paper margin like a compass needle losing its mind. This is new, she thought. This is not in any file. It's quiet if you tell it, Nia said, and no one knew whether she meant the humming or the story. You, Voss started, and the word he grabbed had too many teeth. You witch. He did not say it. He would not be the man who called a girl a witch in a courtroom 100 phones deep. He chose a word with a suit on. You opportunist. She's 9, Priya said. She's coached, Voss returned. By whom, I wonder? Ms. Lane? He flicked his glance toward the reporter and felt a treacherous relief when he found an enemy he knew how to fight. Kira didn't rise. She didn't throw a speech about the First Amendment into a room already too full. She wrote, "He needs a villain he recognizes. He chooses press." She would decide later how much of herself to put in the story. For now, she kept her gaze steady, a lighthouse that didn't claim to be a rescue boat. "You can subpoena phone records," Nia said, ignoring the sideways battle. "Elena's pinged last near the bridge. You know that because you read the report. You told yourself it didn't matter because pings fail people in the water." "Stop," Voss said, but the words sounded like a man pleading with an engine that won't catch. "You can look at your car," Nia continued, and there was no glee in it, only inventory. "There's a repair order, the week after, for a bent front plate. You told the mechanic you hit a post. He knew it was a drift log because of the smell and the salt line. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't want trouble. He likes you." "Sergeant," Voss said sharply, "you will keep her from making defamatory claims about private citizens." "What's the shop?" Priya asked, rapid, pencil ready. Nia looked back as if over her shoulder at a mind that didn't want to be watched. "Wharfside Auto," she said, tasting the cheap coffee and the mouthwash the owner used too often. "They have blue rags and a milk crate and an old bucket labeled sand with 2 letters flaking." Pike shut his eyes. He had brought the judge's keys there. That silly bucket had lived by the door since he was a rookie. He could see the label. He could draw it. "We don't need to litigate old invoices in open court," Voss said. "We are done." "No," Priya replied, and her voice was the exact opposite of the gavel's bark. "We are not done." She lifted her radio to her mouth. "Dispatch, 3 Adam 12. Send 2 units to Gull's Lantern Bridge East Span Marsh access. Observe and secure. Do not disturb potential evidence. Copy?" 3 Adam 12. Copy. The speaker crackled, the bureaucratic language a relief precisely because it was boring. Voss's face colored. "You dare—" "Yes," Priya said, before he could find a nicer word for obstruct. "I'm also requesting a warrant for the premises of 14 Harbor Hill Lane. Study, floorboards near the window radiator. Clerk, we need a duty judge." Rojas's pen hiccuped, then steadied. "Noted," he said, and added the time, 3:41 p.m. He imagined the timestamp like a nail driven into the day. "You come into my courtroom," Voss began, grabbing for his own narrative like a rope in a storm. "And you—" "This is everyone's courtroom," Priya said. She had learned to take pronouns away from men who thought they owned nouns. And right now, it's about a woman who never came home. Luis emitted a sound that was almost a laugh because the line was too clean, too neat for the mess that had been his life since. He wasn't angry at her. The laugh was a tear flipping upside down because it had run out of down. "We should clear the gallery," Voss said, chest rising, falling, a bellows stoking the wrong fire. "Press out, Mr. Marine out, everyone out, the minor into protective custody." "The minor has the floor," Nia said, small but factual, like a clerk reciting a docket number. "Because Elena does." Kira watched Nia's bare feet and thought of the adjectives she was not going to use in her copy. Waif-like, feral, seer. She chose the nouns that would stand a decade from now: child, witness. She thought of how many times the city needed a child to pull a thread because adults were too invested in the sweater they wore. "Sergeant," Voss said, making his voice a chord again, the one that made rooms obey, "you will not." "I already did," Priya said. The radio crackled. 3 Adam 12. Units en route. "Call them off," Voss ordered. "I cannot," she replied. "No law requires me to." "This is contempt." "For what?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "For doing my job? For not letting you adjudicate your own alleged crime?" The words "your own alleged crime" put a shape on the air that changed how it felt in lungs. Pike watched the judge, like a man watches a rope he's cut begin to coil. He wanted to catch it. He also wanted it to finish coiling and finally stop snapping at his ankles. The two wants were incompatible. He had lived with incompatible wants for so long, he had calluses on the places where they rubbed. "This is political," Voss said. "That is what this is. There are people who would love to drag my name through the marsh." "It already is," Kira said before she could warn herself. Voss's head jerked toward her. "Dragged," she added, word steady. "Through the marsh." She held his gaze. We can discover if it's the mud's fault." A low, surprised murmur slid along the benches. Even Priya's mouth tipped. Don't poke the bear. But sometimes a bear was just a man, and men bled. "Sergeant," Voss said, quieter now, switching tactics with an agility that had kept him in his chair for years. "You are making an error that cannot be undone." "I know," she said. "That's why the recorder is on." Rojas flushed at being mentioned without his consent, as if named in a sermon. He adjusted the angle of the mic as a defense. "You are destroying a career," Voss said. "I'm trying not to destroy a case," Priya answered. "Consent to the search." "Absolutely not." "Then we'll get a warrant," she said, "and we'll treat you like anyone else." He laughed, a bark that showed the cords in his neck. "No one treats me like anyone else." Nia, who could have said that line herself on other days for other reasons, tilted her head. "You're just a person," she said. "The river doesn't remember your name. It only remembers sound." Voss looked at her in a way that would have broken a different child. He didn't scare her. She had spent more hours in the tide than he had spent in a robe. "You said you wanted evidence," Priya reminded him. "Let's go get it." He grasped at rulebooks in his mind and found that his hand closed on wet paper that tore. "This court is adjourned," he announced, slamming the gavel like an exit sign he could hit. "Bailiff, clear the room." Pike didn't move fast enough to satisfy the part of Voss that wanted to see people obey, and it startled Voss how that stung. "Now," he insisted. "All rise," Rojas called automatic, because liturgy sometimes saves you when gods fail. People rose, because bodies knew the ritual even when minds balked. Chairs scraped like a small storm. On the way down off the bench, Voss paused. If he left through chambers, he could call his wife, his lawyer, anyone who could tell him which parts of the structure he could still lean on. If he walked out the front like any judge would, he would have to pass the girl who hears the tide. He felt a flash of childishness so quick he almost missed it, the urge to not give her the satisfaction. He went through chambers. Kira didn't follow. She knew when the story was in front of her and when it wasn't. She jotted, "Exit through chambers." She looked up and saw that Nia was staring at the stained glass mariner again, and for a second, Kira imagined the mariner came down at night and swept the floor with a broom, shaking his head at all these people who didn't know what water could do. Luis moved to the aisle and stood there without advancing, as if shore had appeared where there had been only river, and he couldn't trust it yet. "Is she—" He couldn't finish. Nia looked at him and said the hardest, honest thing she had. "She's quiet when I say your name. That's how I know she's listening." Luis bowed, knees in danger again. He didn't cry. He had done so many other things instead of crying that his body had forgotten the technique. Pike cleared his throat. "Sergeant?" "I'm with you," she said. "We go to Harbor Hill for the paper. We go to the bridge to secure. Clerk, call the duty judge. Officer Daniels." She didn't look to see where he was. She knew her squad like a hand knows its fingers. "You're with me." "Yes, Sarge." The radio murmured, "Units on scene in 10. "Tell them to mind the tide," Nia said. Priya's head turned. "What?" "Tell them to mind the tide," Nia repeated. "It's turning. The third tie rots. It will give if you put a man on it." Priya relayed the warning in cop language, the way you might translate a poem into a manual. She had learned to trust people's precise descriptions of danger, whether they came from a dock worker or a child, or a woman who had learned which men didn't hear no. Rojas looked at the docket as if it might rearrange itself into a different day if he stared hard enough. It didn't. He gathered his papers and the recorder, a little reverential with the device, like it had become a relic before his eyes. Kira leaned toward Nia. "You okay?" It came out without her permission. Nia shrugged, an adult's shrug worn on a child's frame. "It's loud," she said, "but it will be quieter if someone listens to her." Kira nodded because it was the only reply that didn't turn the girl into something she could sell. Pike took a breath like a swimmer before a dive. "Miss Okoye," he said, and stopped, because he didn't know whether he was apologizing or asking absolution or both. He settled on the thing he would have said to a sailor's kid at the wharf on a bad night. "We'll be careful on the ladder." "Good," Nia said. "It rocks." The storm shouldered the windows again, and the courthouse's old bones answered with a long whisper, the sound of wood remembering the sea. The gallery had begun to drain, people filing out with the dazed politeness of survivors. Port Meridian would be buzzing in bars by evening. A judge, a girl, a humming nobody could deny, a marsh that kept its mouth shut for a decade and then opened. Priya turned to go, and then paused. Nia? It was the first time she'd said the child's name like an anchor, rather than a label. You coming with us isn't necessary, and you're not riding in the back. Nia nodded, grateful for the dignity embedded in the second sentence. Luis hovered. Can I? Not to Harbor Hill, Priya said. Later, maybe. To the bridge, if it's safe. She watched the war on his face. Let me versus don't let me. We'll call you, she added, and surprised herself by meaning it personally. Ms. Lane, Priya said, you're not riding with us. Wouldn't dream of it, Kira said, but you'll talk on the record after? Priya gave her the look reserved for reporters who asked you to pick the future flavor of your mistakes. After, she said, and Kira knew that meant after something happens, not before. They moved. The machine of the city, its cops, its court, its rumor, engaged. Outside, the rain blurred the edges of things into a single gray. The tide, having run out hard all afternoon, decided to be different and began the long, patient work of coming home. On the way through the double doors, Nia looked back at the bench where the robe had sat. She felt the hum of Elena easing a notch, the way a ship's engine settles when it leaves the chop and finds the channel. It wasn't quiet yet, but quiet was a place you could hear if you learned its shape. Clerk, she said to Rojas as she passed, because she had learned that sometimes you need to tell a particular person the particular thing. Don't let anyone take the recorder. He clutched it. I won't, he said, and believed it. The hallway smelled like wet wool and cold metal. The city's nerves were raw and shining. Harborview Hall's portraits watched people who didn't belong in frames hurry to do what frames never had to do, make choices that could break things and call it justice. Dispatch, the radio said again, and this time Priya didn't hear it as adrenaline. She heard it as a bell. They pushed into the rain. The storm wrapped them in its busy hands. The river down Wharf Avenue, beyond the brick and glass, turned invisibly in its bed, obedient to nothing anyone here commanded.